All patients want a treatment that's safe, effective, available, and affordable. In the case of the atypical aHUS community, they're a rare disease community that is quite fortunate in that only 5% of rare disease groups have an approved therapeutic treatment. Interestingly, the atypical aHUS patients in various nations, however, don't have unrestricted access to the two approved drugs. There's a lot more to atypical aHUS advocacy than simply telling your story. It's important that atypical aHUS patients, their family caregivers, use their patient experiences and translate them into efforts or action points that deepen discussion and that provide insight for researchers, for clinicians, and for medical teams. Every case of atypical aHUS is unique, even among patients with the same genetic mutation. The rare disease atypical aHUS presents with wide variations in duration, severity, and organs affected. The Rare Disease UK study group did a study on patients and patient information and how well informed rare disease patients were in general. Interestingly, over a third of rare disease patients did not understand all the information they were given. And almost half of the rare disease patients and family caregivers responded to that UK rare disease study that they had to research information for themselves, 45%. And that is really quite telling. The Atypical aHUS Global Action Team creates content to address these issues. We speak in plain language. We write with description that describes the holistic impact of atypical aHUS on patients and their families, because atypical aHUS affects people in all areas of life. Here's one example of what we like to call needs-based advocacy, and that is that we've created content on a QR code that directly brings patients and family caregivers to information on the aHUS Alliance Global Action website. One example of that, of needs-based advocacy, is our tool, Know Atypical aHUS, Know Us. As patients and family caregivers ourselves, our resources address how atypical aHUS affects things like focus and work production, quality of life, and attitudes of others toward us, because atypical aHUS may be considered an invisible illness. The symptoms all often present in a very vague manner, and they're not something that the general population or teachers or employers would be able to see when they look at an atypical aHUS patient. At work and school, things like focus and work production can be impacted because atypical aHUS involvement may have some central nervous system involvement that affects memory, but also treatment time, quality of life issues. These are all the things you would find addressed on some of our materials, such as Know aHUS, Know Us. We regularly survey patients in various nations. We did a poll of 270 patients across all 7 continents and devised 4 reports that were data-rich from that poll data. An rapid and accurate diagnosis. Perhaps sometimes it's not so easy to say, but it's actually quite hard to accomplish that simple idea of having atypical aHUS patients have a rapid and accurate diagnosis. Time is really of the essence to prevent organ damage, such as kidney failure, which could lead to dialysis and the need for a kidney transplant. The severity of condition is something that was addressed in our research report number 3 on specialty care. Report number 3 addressed in part the severity of their atypical aHUS patient status by the time patients reached a specialist. Normally, you would have patients go and see their general practitioner and then be referred usually to a nephrologist or to a home hematologist. but almost 1/3 of patients reported that they were considered by their medical team as being in a life-threatening condition. And additionally, 1/3 more reported that their condition was established as being of critical status. While 47% of patients and family caregivers mentioned that their disease was diagnosed in 7 days or less, it's important to note that a good portion, that means that more than half of atypical aHUS patients, took an extended period of time to reach an accurate diagnosis. And in fact, 13% of atypical aHUS patients took over a year to receive a correct and accurate diagnosis. A key facet of atypical aHUS advocacy for the aHUS Alliance Global Action Team is what we like to call needs-based advocacy. We have begun and maintain a network of aHUS clinician researchers who not only see patients but are active in research as well. And these wonderful physicians are volunteers to help other medical personnel with diagnosis and care plans to manage this very complex disease. This is a doc-to-doc directory of sorts. They communicate on secure platforms associated with their hospital or university. A key need is for interdisciplinary care teams at hospitals and clinics worldwide. In order to obtain a rapid and accurate diagnosis, multidisciplinary care teams are called for. Those teams would require knowledge of various conditions that are similar to atypical aHUS. Multidisciplinary care teams would also address multi-organ involvement that is common with atypical aHUS. It's through the volunteer efforts of atypical aHUS clinicians and researchers that we hope to gain a better foothold and increase the opportunity for more rapid and accurate diagnosis, which will help ensure better patient outcomes. Information that would be given is sharing information about case histories, looking to see whether certain tests have been ordered, such as an Adams TS13 level, complement panels, or certain blood tests that would help give information. There are also TMA and atypical aHUS diagnostic algorithms, which are basically a flow chart to help reach decisions on atypical aHUS diagnosis, because atypical aHUS is confused with various other forms of thrombotic microangiopathy. Atypical aHUS is actually a diagnosis that's made after other medical conditions are ruled out. And this aHUS diagnosis of exclusion means that there are various diagnostic routes for physicians to weed out information to determine the appropriate diagnosis and therefore the appropriate treatment for that particular patient. The TMA diagnostic routes could be considered rather a roundabout, and it's easy for a diagnostic decision to be stuck in that roundabout of considering, is it TTP? That is the most common misdiagnosis for atypical aHUS patients. But is it another form of thrombotic microangiopathy? Thrombotic microangiopathies are clinical syndromes that exhibit common symptoms such as destruction of red blood cells, low platelet numbers, and organ damage that occurs with the formation of tiny blood clots in small blood vessels. If you'll look at the chart on this page, you'll see that there are three general categories of thrombotic microangiopathy: genetic or primary TMAs, infection-associated TMAs, and secondary TMAs that may be considered as related to another condition where atypical aHUS would be a secondary diagnosis to some other issue, medical issue that is going on. You'll see that there are various word affiliations. Atypical aHUS was meant as a category originally to distinguish it from regular aHUS, or the more common type of infection-associated aHUS. At this point, the terminology and the classification makes it very difficult for physicians and patients alike to keep alert and aware for different research due to the variation in their terms and classifications. So we're pleased that this is being examined. So atypical aHUS may in the near future be called an entirely different name to better distinguish it among the different syndromes of thrombotic microangiopathy. So how will these knowledge gaps be filled in? How will physicians be able to better diagnose atypical aHUS? Well, interestingly, with COVID-19, one of the small bright spots was that the clotting action is a type of thrombotic microangiopathy that is being better studied because of the pandemic. Interestingly, the symptoms that are mentioned for long COVID, where people have lingering symptoms and lingering issues with COVID-19, are similar to what atypical aHUS patients have been experiencing. Whether it's fatigue, and that obviously would be tiredness that can affect your entire quality of life, whether it would be something more physical like nausea or GI issues that are involved, mental fog for cognition issues such as memory or ability to focus, or multi-organ involvement. Anywhere the blood flows, those tiny clots can form to damage organs, and that for atypical aHUS patients would include the heart, brain, organs other than the kidney, to include things like eyes or the functioning of the gastrointestinal tract. We need to look closer at the research that's going on in different fields, to include PNH, which is a different rare disease, but shares some of those common hallmarks found in atypical aHUS. So we're looking for those clues, and we're looking for not only the information, but also some insights, because whether it's atypical aHUS genetics, learning more about what triggers the disease into activities, learning about different subtypes of atypical aHUS, not all are complement-mediated disease, and how will that affect tailored treatment? Once we know more, will there be optimal treatment times or durations for atypical aHUS patients? We're looking to fill in these knowledge gaps, and this is an exciting time for that new information to come to light. We do have patient-reported outcomes when patients themselves are reporting the effects of the disease, and that's incredibly important for things like clinical trials, but also on patient monitoring. There is no standard protocol at this point in time for patient monitoring. We have some vague guidelines, but it would be especially important for people to be monitored who have discontinued treatment, or perhaps even for patients who have a family member and therefore may have a genetic predisposition for atypical aHUS activity. Atypical aHUS, sometimes we focus mostly on the physical parts of the disease, and that's for a very good reason. Atypical aHUS can be considered a life-threatening disease that affects multiple organs. Sometimes, unfortunately, patients experience symptoms that are so very vague that whether it's nausea, unexplained black and blue bruising, difficulty at home or work with memory issues and staying on task with work production. Very vague things like this can be attributed to viral illnesses or other effects. So often atypical aHUS patients do not make it to a specialist in time and end up in an intensive care unit at the hospital. Interestingly, there is a small French study done on ITTP and atypical aHUS patients. It was a follow-up study, long-term, about patients who had been involved with ICU care. And they found that there was evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. What the Atypical aHUS Alliance Global Action Team does is take research like this, showcase it across our social media, but also we take that information and put it into usable form for patients. We did an article on mental wellness, for example, and those resources offer that kind of information about mental wellness. It affects the whole family when a patient has atypical aHUS. So that means that there is caregiver stress, there's anxiety, perhaps depression among siblings, parents. It affects everything and everyone. A benefit from having the aHUS Alliance Global Action Team involved is we're patients and caregivers ourselves. So we have a deep understanding and can provide both information and insight, but most importantly, resources. What we have found to help us may, in fact, help other people navigate the changes of atypical aHUS as well. In closing, we'd like to encourage you to be an advocate, to raise your voice. What can you do, and how can you do it? It will take all of us to create meaningful change, to get an accurate and rapid diagnosis. It's really critically important that everyone become involved in various aspects. We need patients to be engaged in research and clinical trials. There will not be any new drugs coming to market or any improvements in filling in those knowledge gaps unless patients are involved in those efforts. We encourage you to discuss with your medical team because you need to be actively involved in your care. You need to be a compliant patient with your care plans, but beyond that, there are things that you can personally do. You can support local blood drives and organ donor awareness campaigns at work or at school, or on social media at your hospital or in a clinical setting. You can educate yourself. It's key that you keep current with clinical trials and new research findings. Our website is an independent and objective source of aHUS information, resources, and news. So engage regionally with atypical aHUS awareness efforts. We have 2 days each year that are set aside for raising awareness and the visibility of aHUS, its patients, and its issues that are involved in atypical aHUS care. Rare Disease Day is marked for all 6,000 plus rare disease groups, the last day of each February. But we've set aside a special day, 24 September, for a campaign called aHUS Awareness Day, where you'll see different resources, assets, questions, and interesting thoughts to ponder across social media and on our website at www.ahusallianceaction.org. Stay involved year-round through kidney organizations. Keep informed. Rare renal groups and genetic groups often include atypical aHUS patients. It's up to all of us, and I hope you'll join in.